Now.
Live from the New Scientist Labs, it's Janine Young with Wammo on Kiwi.
It's from New Scientist Laboratories in Melbourne City. Janine Young joins us this morning. Hello to you, Janine.
Good morning, how are you?
Good, via Skype this time as well. So if you're watching the live video stream, you'll be able to see Janine in that New Scientist Laboratory, which looks strangely like a living room.
It's actually my study, my office, but that's okay. You need offices in laboratories all the time anyway. That's okay.
Absolutely. Now, today, a couple of great topics. First one that I've been pondering for a few years now, and I'm glad some people are starting to think about it, but what is going to happen to all the data that we have online? You know, all the email, the videos, and all the pictures. Certainly, I've got a lot of stuff stored online these days. You know, what's going to happen to this stuff into the future? Is it always going to be around?
The short answer is probably no. And the thing is that it's not just what's online, it's also what's on your own computers. It's what on the server systems of universities, big corporations, anyone that stores this kind of information. Where's it all going to go? Because things like hard drives that are actually part of the servers, the massive data centers that people like Google and the like use, aren't built to last. They were never meant to be for long-term storage. Even magnetic tape, which is what a lot of backups are put onto, even those are likely not to last more than probably 5 to 10 years. And there's no long-term solution for how a lot of these are going to be backed up. And this article is talking about what's going to happen if, for example, there's some kind of low-level cataclysm, so there's no power, and a lot of these sorts of drives are not powered up properly. They're not meant to last in warm and humid conditions. So a lot of the quality can go down on them then. There's quite a few things to be concerned about here, because without power, these aren't going to be kept cool. And how are people going to be able to retrieve the information later on? Will it in fact stand up when the people need to be able to get to it later on?
Yeah, and when you think about it, say like a company like Google, I mean, I'd imagine they're pretty smart and they've got their data centers all around the world, but a lot of these companies come out of San Francisco, out of Silicon Valley. And one thing that we know about that region is prone to earthquakes. So that would be a natural disaster that could really affect things.
Absolutely. And as soon as you take into account that, as I said, they need to be kept cool, most of the energy for the internet is actually used on cooling data centers. They have to be kept cool. And there's vast amounts of energy being used for that. So as soon as that disappears, you have a question of whether or not this data is going to be able to hold up under those sorts of conditions, which frankly aren't going to be ideal. So you've got that issue, but then you've also got the issue of how people later on, post-cataclysm, you know, if, for example, there's a global crisis in North America, if it knocks out the power grid, we're interconnected as societies as we never really have been before. So it means that one society can easily knock out another. And I don't know, if a massive virus goes through, we had issues with swine flu last year. Yes. If that was more serious, how will survivors eventually be able to get to the information? Because you might be able to reconnect the power, but what happens if you've lost, you know, a few sectors on a disk, which there's a certain type of disk at the moment, is the most reliable. They say should last 100 years, but that's as good as it gets, 100 years. If you have a whole bunch of information crammed onto all of these storage things, because they are cramming more in now. I think it's like 200 megabits per unit or something like that. It's huge amounts of information. And it means that once you actually lose a small part of that, you're more likely to lose more data because there's more on it in the first place.
Right.
So none of this is stable storage, none of it at all. And so how are we going to be able to protect it long term? And how will people be able to retrieve it if, say, computers disappear and there's no power for them?
Yeah.
It's all gone.
It's interesting because you're talking about sort of how long these storage mediums actually last. I do remember years ago they were saying the CD was only going to last 10 years. But one thing that we do know is that it has lasted a lot longer than that. Hard drives, they do seem to die. But what about this new flash or solid state drives that are now being installed in a lot of computers? In fact, the iPad device that's just been announced today has a solid state hard drive. Do we know how long they're meant to last?
Even flash drives are not going to last more than perhaps 20 years. They're not, again, really built to last. These days, storage is built for speed and capacity, not for stability. I mean, I don't know about you, but I've had drives on there that have failed catastrophically, and you go, well, that's it then.
Yeah.
How am I going to get the information off that?
Yeah.
My computer died last year, and I went, that's my photos, that's my emails, that's all the articles I do for New Scientist. All this information was lost, and it meant that it was sitting somewhere in my computer, but I couldn't get to it.
Yeah.
And that would be the problem that anyone would face, because you have all the knowledge of humanity sitting on a computer, and it's no good if you can't power it. It's no good if you don't have the specialist software. Even some of the old tapes from one of the lunar orbiter missions, 5 of them, in fact, from NASA in the 1960s, they took a whole bunch of high-resolution images, and a lot of the engineers wanted to be able to get to it again. But it takes special knowledge to be able to rebuild, if you like, the machines were able to read those tapes. And it was only because there was a retired engineer around that they were able to reconstruct it so that I could actually pick the tapes up and pick the information up through it. So as soon as you start losing engineers, scientists, doctors, anyone who actually understands how these things work and how the information can be interpreted, again, another source of the information being lost. So it's actually all a bit concerning, and suddenly, clay tablets look really good.
Yeah. So at the moment, not a lot of solutions. Only the old sage old device. Just keep on backing stuff up onto 1,000 different copies.
Well, that's also one of the things that the things that are likely to survive are going to be the things that have lots of copies that are backed up a lot of the time. So it's very possible that we'll end up with Britney Spears as the thing that they read in the 22nd century, and kind of go, oh, geez, that was characteristic of human civilization before it all failed. No, it was only because she was popular, and only then certain segments of society, and let's not dwell on that. I mentioned ACRA a few weeks ago, and I was really taken off air, so we won't do that again.
Hey, Janine, we'll move on from that. Finally, the science of crow attacks, and I'm talking about the bird here.
Everybody knows that crows are fairly smart birds. They tend to get a little bit snarky sometimes, and they've found that if you actually wear a specific mask, a specific face, when you go and ring them, because you need to keep control of populations and the like, when you go back with that same mask on, the birds get really snarky with you. They recognise your face, and they can do so for more than 3 years. They've got a memory, and better yet, they pass it on to their offspring and to other people in their groups.
But they're a bird brain.
They're a bird brain, but don't be thinking that bird brains don't have any kind of intelligence, because they're recognising people and it's staying with them. And they're kind of going, nah, don't like you, and I'm staying away from you, and you can stay away from everything I care about as well. It's very likely that they're also watching the birds and cats in the area. And it's one of those things that no one really knew whether or not it was the gait of a person, or the way they walk, or the red jumper that they wore all the time. But it turns out it's someone's face, and they recognise it and they remember. So wily creatures, and they have a memory.
So they're seeing more than just 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth. They're actually recognising the distinct features of a face.
They are. And this is new. They haven't found that before. And even the researchers are a bit concerned by it, because they're going, geez, we're going to have to be really careful when we go out and ban them. Because if we don't take care to try and conceal our faces, when we go back, we won't be able to get near them.
Yeah.
Because the birds learn as much as anything else. They know first time round what happens to them. They don't like it. So they modify their behaviour so that it doesn't happen again, and they know who to avoid. They're very carefully watching their environments, including who's going to get them.
Yeah. Bird vision, when it's represented on I don't know, like a wildlife documentary or something, it's always like really zoomed in, and everything else around where they're zooming in is blurry. But I don't know if we actually know what they see, do we?
I don't think so. There's a guess. You can actually work out what animals are going to see by the structure of their eyes. Because birds have 2 eyes, they're going to have a field of view out of each of them. So, you can make a guess on that. We know that the bees, for example, and flies have compound eyes. So it's not just one unit in the eye. There's a whole bunch of them put together. And that's going to give a number of different perspectives from each of those, the parts of the compound eye coming together. So you can guess, but no, of course, we're never really going to know, just as we don't really know what they think and whether or not they feel and that kind of thing. We can guess, but a lot of the time I think we're imposing human emotion and human images and that kind of thing onto what they feel, because a lot of the time I suspect, and I'm not any kind of behavioural scientist, but I suspect they're more concerned with survival more than anything else.
Yeah. Interesting stuff. Well, those stories you'll find in the New Scientist magazine, which comes out next week, and also eventually online as well, newscientist.com. You can also view this video once again up on YouTube, the YouTube channel, the Radio Wammo Show YouTube channel, even via kiwifm.co.nz as well. Janine, thanks so much. We'll catch you next week.
Pleasure.
See ya.
See you next week.